The shot rang out just as Katherine Morrison stepped off the afternoon stagecoach into St. Joe, Missouri. And suddenly, the dusty Main Street erupted into chaos. Two men stood 20 paces apart, their pistols drawn and aimed not at each other but converging their fire toward the very spot where she stood frozen, her traveling bag slipping from her fingers. Before her mind could even process the danger, strong hands grabbed her waist and yanked her sideways with such force that her bonnet flew off. She hit the ground hard behind the weathered water trough just as splinters exploded from the wooden post where her head had been a heartbeat before. "Stay down," a rough voice commanded near her ear, and Katherine found herself pressed against the solid chest of a man who smelled of leather, horse, and sun-warmed cotton. His body curved protectively over hers as more shots cracked through the May afternoon of 1873, each one making her flinch despite the solid barrier of the trough between them and the gunfire. "Who are they shooting at?" she gasped, trying to see past his shoulder. "You, apparently," he said grimly, and she felt him shift his weight, heard the distinctive sound of a revolver being drawn from its holster. "Though I cannot figure why anyone would want to kill a lady fresh off the stage." Katherine's heart hammered against her ribs. She had come to St. Joe to start fresh, to escape Boston and the scandal that had followed her family name after her father's business partner had absconded with half the city's investment money. Nobody here was supposed to know her. Nobody was supposed to care that Katherine Morrison had arrived to take up a position as schoolteacher in this frontier town. The man above her raised slightly, and she got her first real look at him. He was young, perhaps 25 to her 22 years, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. Dust covered his worn denim pants and the blue shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. A deputy's badge glinted on his chest. "Ethan Walsh," he said shortly, not taking his eyes off the street. "Deputy Marshal. And you are in considerably more trouble than most visitors to our town." "I don't understand. I've never been west of the Mississippi before today." Another bullet struck the trough, sending water spurting through the hole. Ethan swore under his breath and fired twice in rapid succession. Katherine heard a cry of pain and the sound of someone running. When she dared to peek around the edge of the trough, she saw one man clutching his shoulder while his companion dragged him toward the alley between the general store and the saloon. "Stay here," Ethan ordered, already moving. "Where are you going?" "To arrest those idiots before they reload." He was halfway to his feet when Katherine grabbed his arm. "They will shoot you." That is generally what people do when a lawman comes after them. But he paused, looking down at where her hand clutched his sleeve. Something passed between them in that moment, something Katherine could not name but felt all the way to her bones. Then Ethan gently removed her hand and stood, his pistol trained on the alley. The street had emptied as if by magic, the way frontier towns learned to do when gunfire started. Katherine slowly got to her feet, her green traveling dress now thoroughly ruined by dust and water. She watched Ethan move with careful precision toward the alley, his whole body tense and ready. "They are gone," called a voice from across the street. An older man with a sheriff's badge emerged from behind a hitching post. Saw them ride out the back way, headed east. Ethan holstered his gun and turned back toward Katherine. In the bright afternoon sun, she could see him more clearly now. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once, and a mouth that seemed unused to smiling. There was something about the set of his shoulders, the way he carried himself, that spoke of a man who had seen too much too young. "You are the new school teacher," he said as he approached. It was not a question. "Yes, Katherine Morrison. How did you know? Small town. We have been expecting you for a week. The school board has been in a state about it." He bent to retrieve her bag from where it had fallen in the street, examining it for damage. "Though they failed to mention that someone might try to murder you on arrival." Catherine's legs suddenly felt weak. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in, and she reached for the trough to steady herself. Ethan was at her side instantly, his hand supporting her elbow. "Easy now. The danger has passed. Why would anyone want to shoot me? I don't know a soul in this town." "That is what I intend to find out." His voice was gentler now, and when she looked up at him, she saw concern in those gray eyes. "But first, let's get you somewhere safe." "Can you walk?" Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. Together, they made their way down the street toward a small house with a white picket fence, Ethan keeping himself between her and the buildings where the shooters had disappeared. The sheriff had vanished again, presumably to organize a posse. "This is Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house," Ethan explained as they climbed the steps to the porch. "She is expecting you, has a room all ready." Before he could knock, the door flew open to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "Mercy, I heard the shooting." "Is this our new teacher? What happened?" "Someone took shots at Miss Morrison," Ethan said. "She is unharmed but shaken." Mrs. Fletcher made immediate clucking sounds and ushered Katherine inside, firing questions faster than Ethan could answer. Katherine found herself deposited in a comfortable chair in a sunny parlor, a cup of tea appearing in her hands as if by magic. "I will need to ask you some questions," Ethan said, standing by the doorway as if reluctant to leave. "About who might have reason to wish you harm." Katherine wrapped her hands around the warm cup, trying to stop their shaking. "My family had some difficulties back in Boston. A scandal involving my father's business partner, but everyone involved is either in jail or dead. It cannot possibly be related. Tell me anyway." So Katherine told him about her father, a respected banker who had trusted the wrong partner. About how Richard Mallory had convinced dozens of Boston's wealthiest citizens to invest in a silver mine that did not exist. About how her father had discovered the fraud but died of a heart attack before he could prove his own innocence. About how Richard had fled west with the money, leaving the Morrison name in tatters and Katherine unable to find respectable work in Boston. "Richard Mallory died 6 months ago," she finished. "Killed in a mining accident in Colorado, or so the papers said. There is nothing left of that affair except ruined reputations." Ethan had listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. Now he leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "Mallory is dead, but what about his associates? Anyone who might blame your family for his exposure?" "I suppose it is possible, but I cannot imagine who would care enough to follow me all the way to Missouri." "Someone cared enough to know exactly which stage you would be on." Ethan straightened. "I will dig into this. Meanwhile, you stay close to the boarding house. Don't go anywhere alone. But I am supposed to start teaching on Monday." "I need to see the schoolhouse, meet the school board. I will arrange for you to do all that with an escort. Until we know what is happening, I want you protected." He settled his hat back on his head, preparing to leave. "I gave my word to keep this town safe, Miss Morrison. That includes you now." After he left, Mrs. Fletcher showed Katherine to her room, a small but pleasant space with lace curtains and a view of the street. Katherine tried to rest, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw those gun barrels swinging toward her. She kept seeing Ethan Walsh too, the way he had moved to shield her without hesitation, putting his own body between her and the bullets. She barely knew the man, yet he had saved her life. That evening, Katherine came downstairs to find that Mrs. Fletcher had prepared a welcome dinner. Several townspeople had been invited to meet the new teacher, including the president of the school board. a minister and his wife, and Deputy Marshal Ethan Walsh, who arrived scrubbed clean and wearing a fresh shirt that made his eyes look even more striking. "Miss Morrison," he greeted her formally, but there was warmth in his voice that had not been there earlier. "Feeling better?" "Yes, thank you, and please call me Katherine. I think being shotted together allows for some informality." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then you must call me Ethan." Dinner was a pleasant affair despite the circumstances. The school board president, Mr. Harrington, was enthusiastic about Katherine's teaching experience and her ideas for the curriculum. The minister's wife promised to introduce her to all the mothers in town. Through it all, Katherine was aware of Ethan's presence across the table, the way he watched the windows and doors even as he participated in the conversation. "Any word on those men?" Mr. Harrington asked him as dessert was served. "Not yet." The sheriff took a posse out, but they lost the trail about 5 miles east. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We will find them." After dinner, the guests departed one by one until only Ethan remained, helping Mrs. Fletcher clear the dishes despite her protests. "You do not need to stay," Katherine told him. "I am sure you have other duties. My duty right now is making sure you are safe. Those men are still out there." He carried a stack of plates to the kitchen, and Katherine followed. "You cannot guard me every moment. You have a whole town to look after." "The town is quiet tonight. And frankly, Miss Morrison, Katherine, you are the most pressing concern at present. Someone tried to kill you in broad daylight on a crowded street. That takes either desperation or significant motivation, neither of which bodes well." Katherine leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly exhausted. "I just wanted a fresh start, a chance to build a life somewhere my family's shame had not reached." Ethan dried his hands on a towel and turned to face her. In the lamplight, his features seemed softer, more approachable. "You will have that chance, I promise you." "You cannot promise that. You do not even know me." "I know you did not panic when those guns went off. I know you care about teaching children. I know you grabbed my arm to try to keep me from running into gunfire, even though you were terrified." He took a step closer. "That tells me enough." Katherine's breath caught. There was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity that made her heart race for entirely different reasons than fear. She had only known this man for a handful of hours, yet she felt inexplicably drawn to him. "I should let you rest," Ethan said quietly, but he did not move away. "It has been a difficult day. Will you come by tomorrow to escort me to the schoolhouse? I will be here at 9 o'clock sharp." He reached out as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and dropped his hand. "Sleep well, Katherine." That night, Katherine lay in her unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of St. Joe settling into darkness. Somewhere out there were men who wanted her dead. But somewhere out there was also Ethan Walsh, and the memory of his protection made her feel safer than she had in months. The next morning dawned bright and warm. Katherine dressed carefully in a practical navy dress and pinned her dark blonde hair into a neat bun. When she came downstairs at 8:45, she found Ethan already waiting in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor, his hat in his hands. "Good morning," he said, standing as she entered. "Ready to see your new school?" The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple wooden building painted white with a small bell tower. Inside, Katherine found a single large room with rows of desks, a blackboard, and shelves waiting to be filled with books. Morning light streamed through the windows, and she could picture it filled with children, alive with learning. "It is perfect," she breathed, turning in a slow circle. Ethan watched her from the doorway, something soft in his expression. "The last teacher left to get married. Moved to Kansas City with her husband. The children have been without proper schooling for 3 months now." "How many students?" "About 20. ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Farm children mostly, some from town. They are good kids, just a bit rough around the edges. Katherine walked to the teacher's desk and ran her hand over its worn surface. I can work with rough edges. That is what teaching is for. They spent the next hour going through supplies and discussing the curriculum. Ethan proved surprisingly knowledgeable about what the children needed to learn, and Katherine discovered that he himself had only had 5 years of formal schooling before his father died and he had to start working. That must have been difficult, Katherine said, leaving school so young. I was 12, old enough to handle a gun and ride fence lines. My mother needed the money after Pa passed. He gazed out the window toward the distant hills. I taught myself to read better from newspapers and wanted posters, not exactly a classical education. But you educated yourself nonetheless. That shows character. He looked back at her, and that intensity was there again. You have a kind way of seeing things. They were standing close together by the bookshelves, close enough that Katherine could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back. We should get you back to Mrs. Fletcher's. I need to check in with the sheriff about the investigation. As they walked back through town, Katherine noticed people watching them from windows and doorways. A few women whispered behind their hands. She realized that being escorted everywhere by the deputy marshal was going to create talk, but she found she did not care as much as she should have. "Have you always wanted to be a lawman?" she asked as they passed the general store. "Not always. When I was young, I wanted to be a rancher like my father. But after he died and I saw how easily the law could be bent against those without power or money, I decided I wanted to be the kind of man who stood between the innocent and those who would harm them." He touched the badge on his chest almost unconsciously. "It does not pay much and it is dangerous, but it matters. That is a noble calling, or a foolish one depending on who you ask." But there was pride in his voice, and Katherine understood that this was a man who had found his purpose. They were nearly back to the boarding house when Sheriff Garrett intercepted them, his face grave. He pulled Ethan aside for a whispered conversation, and Katherine saw the deputy's expression darken. "What is it?" she asked when Ethan returned to her side. "The posse found where those men camped last night. They left behind some things, including a newspaper from Boston dated 2 months ago. It had an article about your father's case." Katherine's blood ran cold. "So they are connected to Richard Mallory's fraud." "It appears so. The article mentioned that you had left Boston and were headed west to teach. Someone has been tracking you, Katherine. This was not a random attack." She felt dizzy again, and Ethan's hand was immediately at her elbow, steadying her. "But why? Richard is dead. The money is gone. What could anyone possibly gain from hurting me?" "That is what I intend to find out. But Katherine, this changes things. These men are serious and organized. They tracked you across half the country. We need to take extra precautions." Over the next few days, Katherine settled into a strange new routine. Ethan, or one of his deputies, escorted her everywhere. She met with the school board, organized her classroom, and prepared lesson plans for Monday's first day of classes. All the while, she was aware of being watched, protected, and increasingly fascinated by the man who had appointed himself her guardian. Ethan Walsh, she was discovering, was more than just a skilled lawman. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he relaxed. He was patient with children and kind to animals. He helped Mrs. Fletcher fix a broken step without being asked, and always removed his hat when speaking to ladies. Katherine found herself looking forward to his arrivals each morning, to the conversations they shared as they walked through St. Joe together. On Friday evening, 3 days after the shooting, Ethan arrived at the boarding house with unexpected news. The sheriff got a telegram from the federal marshal in Kansas City. They have been investigating what happened to Richard Mallory's stolen money. Turns out Mallory had a younger brother, James, who believes your father hid some of the stolen funds before he died. That is ridiculous, Katherine protested. My father was innocent. He died trying to prove it. I believe you, but James Mallory does not. According to the marshal, James has been telling anyone who will listen that the Morrison family knows where the money is hidden and that he intends to get it back. By killing me. The theory is he wants to force you to reveal information. The shooting might have been meant to scare you, to make you vulnerable so he could approach you later and demand answers. Ethan's expression was grim. The federal marshal is coming to St. Joe. He wants to use you as bait to draw James Mallory out of hiding. Katherine stood abruptly and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Outside, the street was peaceful in the golden evening light. Children played, shopkeepers closed up for the day, and somewhere a dog barked. It looked safe, normal, exactly what she had been seeking when she came west. I will not let them use you that way, Ethan said quietly from behind her. I told the sheriff I would not agree to it. But if it is the only way to end this, it is not the only way. We will catch James Mallory and his men without putting you in danger. He came to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. I will not lose you to some scheme when I have only just found you. Katherine turned to look at him, her heart pounding. Ethan. He met her gaze, and the longing she saw there took her breath away. I know this is not the time. I know we barely know each other and that you came here to start fresh, not to be courted by a deputy marshal who spends most of his time chasing outlaws. But Katherine, from the moment I pulled you behind that water trough, something changed in me. I cannot explain it, but I need you to be safe. Not just because it is my job, but because the thought of anything happening to you, he broke off, shaking his head. I am saying this all wrong. You are saying it perfectly, Katherine whispered. She reached out and took his hand, marveling at the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. I feel it too, this pull between us. I thought I was imagining it or that it was just gratitude because you saved my life. Is it gratitude? No, it is something far more complicated and wonderful and terrifying. She squeezed his hand. But you are right that the timing is terrible. There are men trying to kill me, and I start teaching on Monday, and everything is uncertain. Life on the frontier is always uncertain, Ethan said. He raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so tender that Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. But I am a patient man. I can wait until this is resolved and you feel safe again. I just needed you to know that my feelings are not purely professional. That night, Katherine could not sleep. She kept thinking about the way Ethan had looked at her, the gentle kiss he had pressed to her hand. She had been courted before in Boston, by proper young men from good families, but none of them had made her feel the way Ethan Walsh did. None of them had faced down gunfire to protect her. None of them had seen past the scandal to the woman beneath. She was falling in love with him. It was too soon and too fast, and yet it felt as inevitable as sunrise. Monday morning arrived, and with it came Katherine's first day as a teacher. Ethan escorted her to the schoolhouse early, checking the building thoroughly before the students arrived. He had arranged for one of his deputies to keep watch outside during school hours. I wish I could stay, he said reluctantly. But the federal marshal arrives today, and I need to meet with him and the sheriff. I will be fine. Deputy Collins is right outside, and I have 20 children who need my attention more than I need worrying. Katherine smiled up at him. Go catch the bad men, Deputy Walsh. Yes, madam. He tipped his hat to her, his eyes warm. I will come by after school to walk you home." The children began arriving shortly after 8 o'clock. They were a mix of ages and abilities, some shy, some boisterous, all curious about their new teacher. Katherine threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. She organized the students by age, assessed their reading and arithmetic skills, and began planning lessons that would challenge them all. By the time the school day ended at 3 o'clock, Katherine was exhausted but exhilarated. This was what she had come west for, this sense of purpose and accomplishment. As the last student left, she began tidying the classroom, erasing the blackboard and straightening desks. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear the door open behind her. "Miss Morrison." Katherine spun around to find a man standing in the doorway. He was in his 30s, well dressed in a city suit, with cold blue eyes and a smile that did not reach them. Behind him stood 2 other men, one of whom had his arm in a sling. These were the men who had shot at her. "Deputy Collins is taking an unexpected nap," the man in the suit said pleasantly. "He will wake with a headache but nothing worse. I am not here to harm anyone, Miss Morrison. I just want to talk." "James Mallory," Katherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "So you know who I am. Good. That saves time." He stepped further into the room and his men closed the door behind them. "My brother Richard stole a great deal of money, Miss Morrison, $500,000 to be precise. When he died, only a fraction of that was recovered. I know your father discovered Richard's hiding places. I know he kept records. And I know that if anyone can tell me where the rest of that money is, it is you. My father kept no such records. He died before he could prove anything. I do not believe you." James Mallory's pleasant expression hardened. "You see, I have debts. Significant debts to people who do not accept excuses. That money my brother stole. Some of it belonged to very dangerous men back east. Men who expect me to recover it or face consequences. So I need you to tell me where your father hid his evidence." "I cannot tell you what I do not know," Mallory sighed. "I was afraid you would say that, which means we will have to do this the difficult way." He nodded to his men. "Bring her." Katherine lunged for the door, but the men were faster. Rough hands grabbed her arms, and despite her struggles, they dragged her toward the back exit. She opened her mouth to scream, but one of them clamped a hand over her face. Then the front door crashed open, and Ethan Walsh burst through with his gun drawn. "Federal Marshal, let her go." The room erupted into chaos. Mallory's men released Katherine and went for their weapons. Ethan fired once, and the man with the injured arm went down. The second man got a shot off that splintered the door frame near Ethan's head. Katherine dropped to the floor as more gunfire erupted, covering her head with her arms. Through the chaos, she heard more men entering, more shouts. When she dared to look up, she saw Sheriff Garrett and the federal marshal had arrived. James Mallory was on his knees with his hands behind his head, his face twisted with rage. His men were either down or surrendering. Then Ethan was there, pulling Katherine to her feet and into his arms. She clung to him, shaking with reaction. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her as if checking for injuries. "Did they hurt you?" "No, I am fine. Deputy Collins is awake and embarrassed but unharmed. They got the drop on him." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes fierce. "When I realized they had gotten past him, when I thought they might have taken you." He pulled her close again, and Katherine felt him shaking too. The federal marshal was reading James Mallory his rights, explaining the various charges he faced. Katherine learned later that Ethan had become suspicious when Mallory arrived in town that morning using a false name. They had been planning to arrest him that evening, but Ethan had decided to check on Katherine early, a decision that had undoubtedly saved her life. "He wanted me to tell him where my father's evidence was," Katherine explained later at the sheriff's office. "He believes my father knew where Richard hid the stolen money." "Your father probably did know," the federal marshal said. "He was a weathered man named Thompson with kind eyes." "We found Richard Mallory's journal after his death. It mentioned that your father had discovered several of his hiding places and was putting together proof, but your father died before he could reveal any of it. So the money is still out there somewhere. Most likely scattered in banks and investments under false names. We may never recover it all." Marshal Thompson looked at Katherine sympathetically. "I am sorry you were drawn into this, Miss Morrison. Your father was an innocent man who died trying to do the right thing. I will make sure that is in my official report." Those words, the official vindication of her father's name, brought tears to Katherine's eyes. Ethan, who had barely left her side since the arrest, took her hand and squeezed gently. "What happens now?" she asked. "James Mallory and his men will be transported to Kansas City to face federal charges. You will need to testify eventually, but that can wait." Marshal Thompson stood and extended his hand to Katherine. "You are a brave woman, Miss Morrison. Your father would be proud." After the marshal left, Ethan walked Katherine back to Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The street was busy with evening activity, people going about their normal lives, unaware of the drama that had unfolded at the schoolhouse. "I should have been there earlier," Ethan said quietly. "Should have anticipated that Mallory might try something during school hours. You saved me. Again, that seems to be becoming a habit, one I would happily break. I would much prefer a life where no one is shooting at you or dragging you out of schoolhouses." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Katherine, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a week. But I need to say this now before another moment passes where I might lose the chance." Katherine's heart began to race. "Ethan, I am falling in love with you. No, that is not quite right. I have already fallen. Completely, irrevocably, in a way I never expected to fall for anyone." He took both her hands in his. "You are brave and kind and intelligent. You care about teaching children even after being shot at on your first day in town. You see the best in people and situations. And when I am with you, I feel like I am the man I always wanted to be." "Ethan," Katherine said again, this time managing to get past the lump in her throat. "I love you too. I did not know it was possible to fall so quickly, but here we are." He kissed her then, right there on the street with half of St. Joe watching. It was a gentle kiss, almost reverent, but it held the promise of deeper passion to come. When they broke apart, Katherine was smiling despite the tears on her cheeks. "I am still new to this town," she said. "Still just the school teacher who got shot at on her first day. I do not know if I am ready for more upheaval. Then we will take it slow. I will court you properly, with flowers and Sunday dinners and walks by the river. We will do this right, Katherine, I promise you." And he kept that promise. Over the following weeks, as Katherine settled fully into her role as teacher and the town gossip about the shooting finally died down, Ethan courted her with old-fashioned dedication. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie. He escorted her to church and sat with her at socials. They took long walks on Sunday afternoons, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. Katherine discovered that Ethan loved reading, though he pretended not to, and that he had a gift for whittling small animals from scraps of wood. She learned that his mother had died 2 years earlier, and that he sent money every month to his younger sister in Kansas City so she could attend a proper finishing school. He was loyal to a fault, had a terrible singing voice, and made the best coffee she had ever tasted. Ethan learned that Katherine had wanted to be a teacher since she was 8 years old. that she loved thunderstorms and hated crowds, that she could quote Shakespeare and do complex mathematical equations in her head, that she cried at weddings and laughed at terrible jokes, that she was kind to everyone but fierce when it came to protecting her students. The town watched their courtship with approval. Mrs. Fletcher beamed every time Ethan came to call. The school board president mentioned how wonderful it was to have such a stable influence for the schoolteacher. Even Sheriff Garrett, a gruff man not given to sentiment, admitted that he had never seen his deputy so happy. In September, 4 months after Katherine had arrived in St. Joe, Ethan took her on a picnic by the river. It was a perfect autumn day, the leaves just beginning to turn and the air crisp with the promise of coming winter. They sat on a blanket watching the water flow past, comfortable in each other's presence. "I have something to ask you," Ethan said, setting down his coffee cup. He looked nervous, which Katherine found endearing. This man who faced down outlaws without flinching was anxious about talking to her. "You can ask me anything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Katherine's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "The only thing of value my father ever gave her, and she treasured it. Before she died, she told me to give it to a woman worthy of wearing it." "Ethan, Katherine Morrison, you are the bravest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You came west to start over, and instead you found yourself shot at, threatened, and dragged into a mess not of your making. Through it all, you kept teaching those children, kept smiling, kept believing in the goodness of people and the possibility of fresh starts." He took her hand. "I know I am just a deputy marshal who will never be rich or famous. I know this life is hard and sometimes dangerous, but I promise to love you with everything I have. I promise to protect you and stand beside you and be the partner you deserve. Will you marry me?" Katherine was crying again, but these were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you. I would marry you today if we could." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her with all the passion that had been building between them over the past 4 months, and Katherine kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Katherine Walsh. I am not Katherine Walsh yet. A technicality. In my heart, you already are." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church at the center of St. Joe. Katherine wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Fletcher had helped her sew, and Ethan wore his best suit with his deputy's badge polished to a shine. The whole town turned out for the wedding, packing the church and spilling out onto the street. Katherine's students sat in the front row, scrubbed clean and beaming with excitement. As Katherine walked down the aisle, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The scandal in Boston, the desperate flight west, the terror of being shot at on her first day in town. All of it had led to this moment, to this man waiting for her at the altar with love shining in his gray eyes. They exchanged vows in front of the minister, promising to love and cherish each other in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. When Ethan kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, which she had opened up for the occasion. There was music and dancing, cake and lemonade, laughter and joy. Katherine danced with her new husband, with Sheriff Garrett, with Mr. Harrington from the school board. She accepted congratulations and well wishes from what seemed like everyone in St. Joe. As the evening wound down, Ethan pulled Katherine aside to the porch where they could have a moment of relative privacy. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest, watching the stars come out over the Missouri plains. "Happy, Mrs. Walsh." Happier than I ever imagined possible, Katherine admitted. When I stepped off that stage 6 months ago, I never could have dreamed it would lead to this. Fate works in mysterious ways. If those men had not shot at you, I might never have pulled you behind that water trough. We might have passed each other on the street 100 times without truly meeting. I prefer not to think about that possibility. Katherine turned in his arms to face him. I prefer to think that we were always meant to find each other one way or another. I like that version better too. Ethan kissed her softly. Ready to go home? Home was a small house on the edge of town that Ethan had been renting for 2 years. It was simple but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor with a fireplace. Ethan had spent the past week fixing it up, painting the walls and repairing loose floorboards. Katherine had sewn curtains and brought her few possessions from the boarding house. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a gradual exploration of each other that left them both breathless and satisfied. Afterward, lying in Ethan's arms in their marriage bed, Katherine felt a peace she had not experienced since before her father's death. She was home, truly home for the first time in years. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine continued teaching, loving her students and the challenge of helping them learn. Ethan continued his work as deputy marshal, keeping St. Joe safe from the various troubles that plagued frontier towns. In the evenings, they would have dinner together and talk about their days. On weekends, they would take long rides into the countryside or work together on improving their house. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes closed the school for days at a time. Katherine learned to love those snow days when she and Ethan would stay inside, keeping the fire burning and reading aloud to each other. Ethan introduced her to his favorite adventure novels, while Katherine shared poetry and Shakespeare. They played cards and cooked elaborate meals and made love by firelight. In the spring, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan over breakfast one morning, watching nervously for his reaction. He stood so quickly that he knocked over his chair, then pulled her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy, Katherine, I am over the moon, elated, terrified but mostly elated." He set her down gently, suddenly solicitous. "Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" "Are you feeling well?" Katherine laughed at his concern. "I am fine, pregnant, not fragile. I plan to keep teaching until the end of the school year." "Of course. But you will let me know if you need anything at all." Their daughter was born in December of 1874, during the first snowstorm of winter. It was a long, difficult labor that left Ethan pacing the floor while the doctor and Mrs. Fletcher attended to Katherine. When he finally heard the baby's cry, Ethan rushed into the bedroom to find his wife exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundled infant. "Her name is Emma," Katherine said softly. "Emma Rose Walsh." Ethan took his daughter in his arms, marveling at her tiny fingers and the way she gripped his thumb with surprising strength. "She is perfect. You are both perfect." He kissed Katherine's forehead. "Thank you for this gift." Emma proved to be a healthy, happy baby with her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark blonde hair. Katherine took a few months away from teaching to care for her, but by spring, she had arranged for Mrs. Fletcher to watch Emma during school hours. It was not a perfect solution, but Katherine was not ready to give up teaching entirely. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, coming home on his lunch breaks to see his daughter and spending his evenings playing with her on the floor. He sang terrible lullabies that somehow always put Emma to sleep and made toys for her from wood scraps. Katherine would watch them together, and feel her heart overflow with love for her small family. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Emma grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved books and animals. Katherine continued teaching, taking summers off to spend time with her daughter. Ethan was promoted to sheriff when Sheriff Garrett retired in 1876, a position that came with more responsibility but also more respect. In 1877, Katherine gave birth to their son, whom they named Edward after Ethan's father. Edward was quieter than his sister, more thoughtful, with his mother's intelligence and his father's steady temperament. Emma adored her baby brother, constantly wanting to help care for him. The town of St. Joe grew and prospered. More families moved in, more businesses opened. The railroad came through in 1878, bringing new opportunities and connections to the wider world. Through it all, Katherine and Ethan remained at the heart of the community, respected and loved for their contributions. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Katherine with a trip to Kansas City. It was their first time away from the children overnight, and Katherine felt both excited and guilty about leaving them. But Mrs. Fletcher assured her that Emma and Edward would be perfectly fine, and Katherine allowed herself to be swept away. Kansas City was bustling and modern compared to St. Joe, with electric lights and fancy hotels. Ethan had saved for months to afford the trip, and he spared no expense in making it special. They stayed in a beautiful hotel, ate at fine restaurants, and attended a real theater performance. But Katherine's favorite moment was simply walking through the city streets with her husband's hand in hers, feeling young and carefree for a few precious hours. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked as they sat in a park watching the sun set. "Choosing this life with me?" "You could have married someone wealthy back in Boston, had an easier life." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "I have never regretted it for a single moment. Ethan, you gave me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You believed in me when my own reputation was in tatters. You protected me, not just from those men who wanted to hurt me, but from my own doubts and fears. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." He pulled her close and kissed her deeply, not caring that they were in public. "I love you too, Katherine Walsh, with everything I am." More years passed, marked by the small joys and challenges of raising children and building a life together. Emma started school under her mother's tutelage and proved to be an excellent student. Edward followed a few years later, quieter but equally bright. They acquired a dog, a spotted mutt that Emma named Patches, and a cantankerous cat that adopted them despite Ethan's protests that he did not like cats. In 1882, on a warm summer evening, Katherine and Ethan sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Emma was 10 now, tall and confident, helping her 7-year-old brother build a fort from old lumber. The dog ran circles around them, barking excitedly. "Can you believe it has been 9 years since I pulled you behind that water trough?" Ethan mused, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like we have always been together, like I cannot remember a life before you. I think about that day often, about how different everything would be if I had been a moment slower, if I had not seen those men draw their guns. I could have lost you before I ever really had you." Katherine took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "But you did not. You saved me, and then you loved me, and you gave me this beautiful life. I came to St. Joe looking for a fresh start, and I found so much more. I found home." As the sun set over the Missouri plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Katherine leaned against her husband and watched their children play. The town of St. Joe bustled around them, peaceful and prosperous. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, carrying new arrivals and new possibilities. But Katherine was not looking for anything new anymore. She had everything she needed right here. A husband who loved her fiercely, children who filled her days with joy, work that gave her purpose, and a community that had embraced her as one of their own. The gunshots that had marked her arrival seemed like something from another lifetime, a necessary catalyst that had brought her to Ethan. She would not wish away the fear or danger, because without them she might never have felt the security of his arms around her, never have known the depth of his devotion. Emma called for her father to come see their fort, and Ethan kissed Katherine's temple before going to join their children. Katherine watched the three of them together, her heart full nearly to bursting. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Katherine and Ethan lay in bed talking softly about their plans for the future. Emma wanted a pony. Edward needed new boots for school. The church social was coming up, and Katherine had volunteered to organize it. Ethan mentioned that the mayor had approached him about running for a position on the town council. These were the ordinary concerns of ordinary people living ordinary lives, and Katherine treasured every moment of it. After the chaos and scandal of her life in Boston, after the terror of being hunted across half a country, this peaceful domesticity was more precious than gold. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her smile. "About how lucky I am. About how that terrible day when I arrived in St. Joe turned out to be the best day of my life, because it brought me to you. The best day of your life was when men tried to shoot you. The best day of my life was when a brave deputy marshal pulled me to safety and then refused to let me go, in every sense of the word." Katherine rolled to face him, propping herself up on her elbow. "You could have just done your job and kept me alive. Instead, you saw me, really saw me, and you loved what you saw. That changed everything." Ethan cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "How could I not love you? From that first moment you were extraordinary. You are still extraordinary, Katherine, every single day." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the comfort and passion of two people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. Afterward, Katherine fell asleep in her husband's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat and the soft sounds of the night outside their window. She dreamed of that first day, of stepping off the stagecoach into chaos and violence. But in the dream, she was not afraid, because she knew how the story ended. She knew that the strong hands pulling her to safety belonged to the man who would become her everything. She knew that the water trough he pulled her behind was just the beginning of a lifetime of him standing between her and harm. In the morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the sound of her children laughing in the kitchen. Ethan was already up, probably making breakfast and trying to keep Emma and Edward from waking their mother. Katherine lay in bed for a moment longer, savoring the peace and contentment that filled their home. Then she rose and dressed, pinning her hair and smoothing her skirts, preparing to face another ordinary, extraordinary day. She found her family in the kitchen, Emma setting the table while Edward helped his father flip pancakes. They all looked up when she entered, their faces lighting with smiles. "Good morning, Mama," Emma said, coming to hug her. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Good morning, my darlings," Katherine replied, kissing the top of her daughter's head and then Edward's when he came for his own hug. Ethan crossed the kitchen to kiss his wife properly. "Good morning, beautiful. I was going to bring you breakfast in bed. I would rather eat with my family." They sat down together around the table, passing plates and pouring milk, talking about the day ahead. It was a scene that played out in thousands of homes across America every morning, nothing special or remarkable. But to Katherine, it was everything. After breakfast, Ethan left for the sheriff's office and the children ran outside to play before the day grew too hot. Katherine cleaned up the kitchen, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind wandered. She thought about writing a letter to Marshal Thompson, who still corresponded with them occasionally. She thought about the new reading primers she wanted to order for the school. She thought about what to make for dinner. These were the thoughts of a woman at peace with her life, a woman who had found her place in the world. No more running, no more fear, no more uncertainty. Just the steady rhythm of days filled with love and purpose. That evening, as had become their tradition, the Walsh family took a walk through town after dinner. Emma and Edward ran ahead with the dog while Katherine and Ethan strolled hand in hand, greeting neighbors and enjoying the cooler evening air. They passed the schoolhouse where Katherine taught, the sheriff's office where Ethan worked, Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house where they had first truly talked. "You remember that first dinner Mrs. Fletcher organized?" Katherine asked. "When you sat across from me, and I could barely concentrate on the conversation, because I was so aware of you watching the doors and windows. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and that I had no right to be thinking such things about someone I had just met, especially someone who had nearly been killed hours earlier. I thought you were very serious and intense, a bit intimidating, actually." Ethan laughed. "I was terrified that whoever wanted you dead would try again, terrified that I would fail to protect you, and then, underneath that, terrified of what I was already starting to feel for you." They had reached the spot where Katherine had first arrived in St. Joe, where the water trough still sat in front of the general store. By unspoken agreement, they stopped there, looking at the weathered wood and remembering. "Right there," Ethan said quietly, pointing to a spot on the ground. "That is where you were standing when I grabbed you. I can still see it perfectly in my mind, the way your eyes went wide with fear, the way your bag fell from your hand. And right there," Katherine said, pointing to the trough, "is where you saved my life, where everything changed." Emma called for them to hurry up, and they continued their walk. But Katherine looked back once at that spot, at the place where her new life had truly begun. She sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the confluence of circumstances that had brought her to St. Joe on that particular day, at that particular moment when Ethan Walsh happened to be watching the street. Some might call it luck or coincidence. Katherine preferred to think of it as destiny, as two souls meant to find each other finally colliding in a shower of gunfire and dust. It was not a romantic story by conventional standards, but it was theirs, and she would not change a single moment of it. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. Ethan's sister came to visit from Kansas City, now a proper lady with refined manners, and thanked Katherine for being good to her brother. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited her mother's love of teaching and her father's sense of justice. Edward proved to have a gift with animals and talked about becoming a veterinarian, a relatively new profession on the frontier. In 1886, Katherine and Ethan celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a surprise party with help from Mrs. Fletcher, inviting everyone in town who had been at the original wedding. The church was once again packed, this time with people celebrating a decade of marriage rather than the beginning of one. 10 years, Katherine marveled as they danced together, the same way they had at their wedding reception. "It has gone so fast." "The best years of my life," Ethan said simply, "and I intend to have 40 or 50 more just like them." "Only 40 or 50. I was hoping for at least 60. He laughed and pulled her closer. "Greedy woman, but I will do my best to accommodate you." Katherine looked around at the familiar faces, at the town that had become her home, at her children laughing with their friends. She thought about the young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 13 years earlier, frightened and alone, seeking nothing more than a job and a fresh start. That woman could never have imagined this life, this abundance of love and belonging. "Thank you," she whispered to her husband. "For what?" "For pulling me behind that water trough. For not just saving my life but giving me a reason to live it. For loving me the way you do every single day." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "For everything, Ethan. For absolutely everything." He kissed her there in front of the entire town, a long, deep kiss that made their children groan with embarrassment and the crowd cheer with approval. When they broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "You never have to thank me for loving you, Katherine. It is the easiest thing I have ever done." The party continued late into the night, filled with music and laughter and the warm glow of community. When they finally returned home, exhausted but happy, Katherine and Ethan stood together on their porch looking up at the stars. "You think we get more lives than this?" Katherine asked thoughtfully. "Other chances, other worlds? I do not know. Why do you ask?" "Because if we do, I want to find you in every single one of them. I want to live 1,000 lives, and I want you by my side in all of them." Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her close. "Then that is what we will do. But for now, this life, this moment, is more than enough." And it was more than enough. More than Katherine had ever dreamed possible when she fled Boston in disgrace. More than she had hoped for when she accepted a teaching position in a frontier town she had never heard of. More than she could have imagined when those gunshots rang out and strong hands pulled her to safety. She had come to St. Joe, Missouri, seeking a fresh start, and she had found a forever love. She had stepped off that stagecoach alone and afraid, and she had built a family, a home, a life worth living. All because a deputy marshal with gray eyes and a good heart had refused to let her stand in the crossfire, had pulled her behind a water trough, and then, quite without either of them planning it, had pulled her into his life and his heart. Years later, when Katherine was an old woman with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, she would tell her grandchildren the story of how she and their grandfather met. She would describe the gunfire and the fear, the water trough and the strong arms that saved her. But mostly she would talk about the love that had bloomed from that chaotic moment, the love that had sustained them through decades of marriage, through the raising of children and the building of a community. "Your grandfather," she would say, "was the finest man I ever knew. He saw me at my most vulnerable and chose to protect me. He could have walked away after the danger passed, but instead he stayed. He courted me and married me and loved me for 53 years, until the day he died peacefully in his sleep with my hand in his." And she would smile through her tears, remembering that first kiss on a public street, the feeling of being pulled behind that water trough into safety and into love. She would remember every anniversary, every ordinary morning, every extraordinary moment of their life together. "That is what real love looks like," she would tell her grandchildren. "Not a fairy tale or a romance novel, but a choice made every day to stand beside each other no matter what comes. Your grandfather chose me and I chose him, and that choice gave us everything that mattered." The children would listen, wide-eyed, to the story of gunfire and heroes, of a young teacher and a brave lawman, of a water trough that became the foundation of a legendary love story. And Katherine would end the same way every time, her voice soft but certain. "I stepped off that stagecoach into danger, but I found something far more precious than safety. I found home. I found love. I found the man who would make every day of my life worth living." And that is the greatest gift I could ever have received. But that was still many years in the future. For now, on this perfect evening in 1886, Katherine Walsh simply stood on her porch with her husband's arms around her, looking at the stars and counting her blessings. Her children slept peacefully inside. Her town slumbered around her, and the man she loved breathed steadily against her hair, solid and warm and real. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. But tonight, Katherine was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Loving and being loved by Ethan Walsh, the cowboy who had pulled her behind a water trough and into a life more beautiful than any story ever written. The end.